Welcome back to Dark Horror Stories. In today's episode, I'm sharing 9 true disturbing stories from Kentucky. These are tales of people who ventured into cave trails, rock shelters, sinkholes, and forgotten hollows and found something they were never meant to see. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe button and let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Story 1. I was 27 when I finally went out to Mammoth Cave on my own, not the lit-up tour sections with railings and bored kids dragging their shoes, but one of the quieter back trails where the woods thin out around sinkholes and the air always feels cooler than it should. I'd been meaning to do it for weeks and kept putting it off because life was busy in that dumb, exhausting way life gets. Laundry in the dryer too long. Coffee maker leaving grounds in the pot. My left bootlace kept fraying and I never replaced it. Nothing important. Just the kind of clutter that makes you want a day alone where nobody can text you and ask for anything. The morning I went, the sky over Edmonson County had that washed-out white look, like the sun was up but hadn't fully committed. I remember the smell more than anything at first. Wet leaves, limestone, and that cold mineral scent caves have, like rainwater trapped in stone. I parked near a half-empty lot with a dented green sedan and an old pickup with feed sacks in the back. There was a vending machine near the visitor building, and I bought peanut butter crackers even though I don't really like them. I think it was Tuesday, or maybe Wednesday, midweek anyway. A woman at the desk, Della, glanced at my trail map and said, "If you hear people off trail, don't answer them." She said it like it was practical advice. Same tone you'd use for don't leave food in your car. I laughed a little and she didn't. That should have been enough. The trail started easy. Packed dirt, exposed roots, little bursts of fern along the edges. At one point, a squirrel ran across the path with something white in its mouth that looked almost like chalk. I stopped to drink from my bottle near a split-rail fence and noticed my own breathing sounded too loud. Not scared yet, but I also wasn't relaxed. That's the closest way I can put it. About an hour in, I came to a narrow spur trail that wasn't marked on my printed map. Not a real trail, more like a footpath worn into habit. The ground dipped there and the trees leaned in close over a bowl-shaped hollow with a low cave mouth at the far end. Not deep from where I stood, just a dark slit under a shelf of rock. I told myself somebody had cut through that way to smoke or drink or get away from the main path. People do that. There was an empty orange soda bottle stuck between 2 roots and a faded knit glove in the leaves. Normal enough. The temperature dropped hard when I stepped into that hollow. Not a gentle coolness, a clear line like I'd crossed from one room into another. I remember rubbing my forearms and hearing a drip somewhere ahead. Steady, hollow, drip, drip, drip. Then I heard my own voice, not in my head, out loud, "Forgot your bag." It came from inside the cave. I spun around so fast I almost slipped, and for one stupid second I checked the ground beside me to make sure I actually had my backpack on. I did. I even reached back and touched it. I told myself what anybody would tell themselves. Echo, somebody messing around, weird acoustics. But the thing that got me was the tone. It wasn't just my voice. It was my exact tired, half-bored way of speaking, like I'd been recorded on a bad day and played back from underground. I backed away from the opening and called out, "Hello?" Nothing. Then, quieter this time, from somewhere behind me in the trees. "Nora." My mouth went dry, so fast it hurt. Only my mother ever said my name like that, soft at the end, almost like she was apologizing for interrupting. She'd been dead 6 years. I didn't answer. I think some decent part of my brain knew answering would be worse. I started back toward the main trail, walking fast but trying not to look like I was panicking, which is ridiculous because nobody was there to see me. Twice I heard steps matching mine off to the right through the brush. Not heavy, not crashing, just measured. If I took 3 quick ones, it took 3 quick ones. When I stopped, it stopped. I kept telling myself, dear, another hiker, my own noise bouncing strangely. Kentucky woods can make you feel watched even when nothing's there, I know that. Then I reached a patch of damp clay where the path narrowed between two rocks and there was a footprint in the middle of it. One print, no others leading up to it, none leading away. It looked almost human, except too long through the arch, and there were 6 toe marks pressed clean into the mud. I stood there staring longer than I should have. That was the moment things shifted for me. Before that, I was collecting excuses. After that, I was just trying not to run. I did anyway when I heard my own voice again, much closer now, just off my left shoulder. Don't make me come get you. I ran hard enough to wrench my bad ankle on a root. Branches slapped my face. My backpack bounced and caught on something and tore loose one of the side straps. I could hear movement behind me, but not the sound a person makes, more like something sliding and stepping at the same time. Fast, then silent, then fast again. The trail bent around another sinkhole and dropped toward a boardwalk crossing. I hit the first plank and looked back. There was somebody standing at the edge of the hollow I'd just come from. Not standing right, though. That's what I still wake up thinking about. The body was mostly hidden by brush, but the head was tipped too far to one side, almost against the shoulder, and the mouth hung open in a shape that wasn't wide so much as deep, as if the lower part of the face had been folded inward instead of down, and where the eyes should have caught light, there was only that flat cave-colored skin. Then it smiled with my mouth. Not literally mine, I know how that sounds. I started to think I understood what I was seeing, and then I realized I didn't. I ran across the boardwalk, lost my footing at the end, and half fell down the bank into a shallow creek. The cold shocked me so hard I nearly blacked out, but the sound changed down there. Water over stone, frogs, wind in sycamore leaves, real sounds. I followed the creek instead of the trail, stumbling along in wet boots until I found a service road and a ranger truck parked near a gate. Della was in the passenger seat, eating from a bag of pretzels. I must have looked insane, soaked to the knees and mud up my shirt, because she got out before I said a word. I asked her if anyone else had been on that trail. She didn't answer directly. She just looked at my torn backpack strap and said, "You answered it, didn't you?" I told her no, and that was true technically. When I got home, I unpacked in the kitchen and found a strip of damp cave clay pressed into the mesh side pocket of my bag. I thought it was just mud until I rinsed it off. Set in the clay were 6 neat little toe impressions, like something had stepped there while the pocket was stretched open. I haven't gone back. What bothers me most now isn't the voice. It's that sometimes when I'm home alone and drop something in another room, I hear myself say very softly, "Forgot your bag." Story 2. My grandfather kept a place outside Slade that nobody in the family wanted after he died. Calling it a cabin is generous. It was a leaning box of gray boards tucked above a sandstone recess off an old trail near Red River Gorge, with 1 room upstairs, 1 room down, and a root cellar dug back into the hill like somebody had started making a burrow and changed plans halfway through. The whole property smelled like mouse nests and cedar blocks and the peppermint candies he used to keep in a chipped dish by the stove. I went there with my cousin Elodie because the county was threatening fines if we didn't clean the lot. That's the kind of thing families do. Somebody dies, and instead of grief you wind up wrestling with padlocks and water damage. I brought work gloves, a flathead screwdriver, a can of off-brand chili, and one of those giant lemon sports drinks that always tastes warmer than the label promises. Elodie brought trash bags, a flashlight the size of a baton, and a radio that only picked up static and church music. On the drive in, we passed a rusted mailbox with no house near it and a line of laundry hanging behind a place that looked abandoned. I remember that because one shirt on the line was a child's yellow raincoat, and it kept twisting in the wind like someone was inside it trying to turn around. Granddad used to say never stay after dark if you heard knocking from underground. He said a lot of things, though. Don't whistle after sundown. Don't sleep with a mirror facing the bed. Don't trust cats that appear on porches that aren't yours. He was a generous man, but not a calm one. The cabin was worse than I remembered. Windows filmed over, porch sagging on one side, a stack of old Reader's Digests swollen with damp. In the kitchen, a tin of bacon grease still sat by the stove, white with dust. Elodie found a pack of playing cards fused together by moisture and laughed like that somehow made the whole day lighter. We worked until late afternoon, hauling out moldy blankets, broken mason jars, and a coffee tin full of buttons. At one point I found 3 spoons neatly lined up on the root cellar steps. I assumed Elodie had set them there while sorting. She swore she hadn't. That cellar had always bothered me. You opened the door in the kitchen floor and cold hit you straight in the face, even in July. The stairs were narrow and slick. The walls weren't properly bricked, just earth packed around rough supports. Our flashlights barely reached the back. "Let's leave that part," Elodie said. I wanted to. Instead I said, "It's probably where the worst junk is." That's the stupid thing about obligations. They make you brave in very unhelpful ways. We went down together. There were shelves with empty jars, a rusted baby crib frame, and a burlap sack split open with potatoes liquefied inside it from years ago. Flies buzzed somewhere in the dark, though I never found where they were landing. Near the back wall, the dirt had caved in around a low opening maybe 2 feet high, like something had tunneled farther into the hillside. I remember kneeling to look because I thought maybe raccoons or foxes had gotten in. What I saw first was fingernails, not claws, nails. Human-looking, except yellow and thick and long enough to curve back into the soil. They were hooked over the lip of that little dirt opening from the inside, as if somebody was listening just beyond it. I jerked backward so hard I sat down in the mud. Elodie asked what I saw, and before I could answer, those fingers pulled away. Quiet, no scramble, no collapse of dirt, just gone. We both heard the breathing after that. It came from inside the wall. Slow, wet, patient. I told myself it could be air moving through the hill, water, an animal in a pocket chamber. But the rhythm changed when we spoke. It paused when we paused. Then something tapped once from the other side of the dirt. A knuckle, maybe. Followed by another. Then a pattern, 3 taps, 2 taps, 3 taps. Elodie grabbed my arm so hard I had bruises later. We climbed those steps fast enough to slip twice. I slammed the cellar door and dragged the kitchen table over it. That should have been the end of the day. We should have left then. Instead, we made the mistake of waiting for dusk because Elodie's tire had gone low on the drive-in and she wanted to patch it before we hit the highway. I stood outside by the truck holding a flashlight while she worked, and all the woods behind the cabin seemed to hold their breath. No birds, no cicadas, nothing. Even the radio inside had gone quiet. Then came the knocking, not loud, more insulting than loud. A measured thud from under the floorboards right below our feet. Thud, pause, thud, thud. The porch swing moved on its own, just once, enough to creak. I whispered, "Leave it." Elodie stood up with the tire iron in one hand. She looked toward the cabin window and I followed her gaze. Someone was inside, looking out through the kitchen glass. I only saw part of the face because the curtain hung crooked, but I saw enough. Skin packed with dirt into the creases. One cheek pressed flat as if it had rested too long against the ground, and the mouth stretched in a thin, dry smile, except it didn't have lips so much as a cracked seam. The worst part was where its hand rested on the windowsill. There was dirt crumbling from under the fingernails, and caught beneath one nail was a little square of plaid cloth from Granddad's old tablecloth set. Something from years back, something it shouldn't have had. We got in my truck and I jammed the key so hard it bent the cheap keychain ring. First try, nothing. Second try, the engine coughed. Behind us, the kitchen door swung open with a flat bang against the wall. Elodie yelled, and I looked once in the mirror. It had come halfway out onto the porch, but not upright. It moved low and sideways, shoulders rolling under the skin in separate motions, like more joints were involved than there should have been. One arm was too long. The hand touched the porch boards before the knee did. I backed us so fast we clipped the fence post and tore off part of the bumper. Gravel sprayed. The thing reached the top stair and stopped there, head tilted toward us, listening. It didn't chase. It watched. At the main road, Elodie said we had to call somebody, but say what? That something in our dead grandfather's cellar had old tablecloth scraps under its nails. When I took the truck through the car wash the next morning, the attendant pointed at the bed and asked what kind of animal I'd hit. Along the inside of the closed tailgate were 4 long dirt streaks ending in finger marks, like something had hung on for a little while after we left. The cabin still belongs to the family. Nobody argues about it anymore. It can sit there and rot into the hill for all I care. Story 3. I took a seasonal job one fall helping survey old access roads in Bell County. The sort of work that sounds more adventurous than it is. Mostly you carry equipment, swat gnats, argue with GPS, and eat lunch out of a cooler that always smells faintly like bleach no matter how much you scrub it. Our crew was small. Me, a woman named Talia, and the team lead, Benno, who wore the same faded blue bandana every day and had a habit of chewing cinnamon gum loud enough to make you notice. We were checking erosion near an abandoned mine spur above a narrow trail locals still used to get between ridges. Not an active site, not anything official, really. Just old cut earth, rusted cable, and a shallow drift opening half swallowed by mountain laurel. The first morning there was bright and sharp, one of those Kentucky autumn days when every leaf looks too vivid to trust. Somebody down in the valley was burning brush, and every so often the wind carried that sweet charred smell uphill. Benno had a paper sack with 2 bologna sandwiches and a bruised pear. Talia kept losing one glove and blaming me. I had a thermos of coffee that tasted like burnt plastic because I'd left it sitting on the hot plate too long. Mundane stuff, enough to make the place feel workable. What threw me off was the silence around the drift entrance. You could hear everything else. Crows, insects, a chainsaw very far off, but around that opening the sound seemed to flatten out. Even our boots on the shale came back wrong, like the hill didn't want to echo. Benno joked that the old tunnel looked like a mouth with bad intentions. Talia told him to shut up. Then we got on with measuring washout and marking stakes. Near noon I found a line of little white objects tucked along the trail edge under a rhododendron. At first I thought mushrooms, then teeth. Not human, I don't think. Too small and too many. Some had been pressed into the mud point first, making a neat row like tiny fence posts. I called Benno over. He said a fox or raccoon had probably dragged a jaw there and bits got scattered. That made sense, mostly, but the teeth were arranged too evenly, and every one of them pointed toward the drift opening. We should have left right then, maybe. Instead, we photographed them and kept working because jobs make you pretend the world is rational. The first real wrong thing happened around 3. I was setting a marker downslope when I heard Talia call my name from above me. Just a quick, sharp Marisol. I looked up and saw her standing near the tunnel mouth with her hard hat on. Then my radio crackled, and Talia's actual voice came through from behind me. "Where'd Benno go?" I turned so fast I pulled a muscle in my neck. Talia was 30 yards downhill, not uphill at all. When we both looked back toward the drift, the figure by the entrance had stepped inside. Benno didn't answer his radio for maybe a minute, might have been less. It felt longer. We found him just inside the opening, staring at the wall. He said he'd heard his father calling from in there. His father lived in Ohio and had not called him since February. Benno kept blinking like he'd walked into a wasp cloud. Then he pointed at the wall. There were handprints on the rock, dozens of them, not bloody, not muddy exactly, but black and shiny, as if someone had pressed tar-coated palms against the stone. Some were adult-sized, some very small. all of them fresh enough to glisten. Talia said we were leaving. Benno agreed too quickly, which scared me worse than if he'd argued. We started back down the trail with our equipment half-packed, and that's when the lights began to fail. Not batteries dying all at once, more like each screen and headlamp dimmed a little every few seconds, as if the day itself were being turned down around us. The sun was still up. I could see the ridge line gold through the trees. But in the cut around the old trail, everything went miner's lamp dark. I heard pebbles shifting above and looked upslope. Something had come out of the drift and was making its way across the spoil bank. I only got one good look. The body was narrow and coated so black it reflected no light, not even around the joints. Its head seemed wrapped or unfinished, except for the mouth, which opened sideways too far across the face. And where its eyes should have been, clusters of pale cave crickets crawled in and out, vanishing into the sockets and reappearing along the cheekbones like they belonged there. That image still turns my stomach. Benno broke first. He ran downslope, lost his footing on shale, and slid 10 feet before catching a sapling. Talia shouted at us both to get off the trail and into the laurel because whatever that thing was, it was moving along the path itself like it preferred the open line of travel. So we cut sideways through brush instead, branches whipping our faces, survey poles abandoned, radio squawking nonsense. I could hear it above us then below us, which made no sense. At one point, I put my hand on a rock to steady myself and found it warm, as if it had been sitting in sun, except we were in shade. We reached a break in the ridge where an old service road cut across the slope. Benno scrambled up first and hauled Talia by the wrist. I came last and looked back because I couldn't help it. It had stopped at the edge of the laurel tunnel we'd burst out of. The crickets had all gone still in its face. One of its arms lifted, not waving exactly, just angling toward us. Then something small dropped from its hand onto the road. We didn't go back for the equipment. County truck picked us up at a gate half a mile down. Later, after the adrenaline burned off, Talia found black smears on the back of my orange safety vest. 5 finger marks, glossy, tar-like. They wouldn't wash out and they smelled faintly of wet pennies. I still have the vest in a plastic tote in my basement. I don't know why I kept it. Proof, maybe, or maybe I'm afraid if I throw it away, something will come looking for where it went. Story 4. I used to trail run in the mornings because it made me feel like one of those organized people who has a system and a water bottle with measurement lines and a life under control. The truth was I mostly did it to outrun my own nerves. This was near Carter Caves, on a loop that cut past a rock shelter and curved through a low ravine before climbing back toward the parking area. Not a difficult route. I'd done it enough times to know where the roots bulged under the leaves and which bend always held that same spiderweb at face level if you weren't paying attention. It was early spring. Damp ground, no leaves fully out yet, that gray-brown look woods get before they decide whether to be pretty again. My neighbor Amos had given me a banana for breakfast from one of those giant wholesale boxes he bought, and I ate it in the car while listening to a morning host complain about college basketball. I remember wiping dashboard dust with my sleeve at a red light. I remember one shoelace felt tighter than the other. Things like that stay weirdly clear. The trail was empty when I started. Just me, a half-charged phone, and the soft hiss of my windbreaker sleeves. The rock shelter on that loop always made me slow down because the temperature dropped near it and the air smelled old, almost stale, even though it was open to the morning. That day there was a deer standing in front of it, not unusual at first. Thin doe winter coat still patchy, ears flicking. It was positioned broadside across the trail and looking toward the shelter instead of at me. I stopped and clapped once to shoo it off. It turned its head. Everything in me tightened. The face was wrong. Not gore, nothing dramatic like that, just wrong in a cleaner, quieter way that made it worse. The muzzle was too short, and when the lips pulled back, the teeth were flat and crowded like a person's. Not perfectly human, but close enough that my stomach dropped. I actually said out loud, "Nope," which I'm embarrassed to admit. Then I tried to rationalize it. Injury, birth defect, disease. I'd seen pictures online of animals with strange jaws. Nature makes mistakes. That's what I told myself while backing up. The deer took one step forward, and I saw its front leg bend the wrong way halfway down, as though there were an extra joint tucked inside it. The hoof touched the ground, but something like fingers spread briefly in the mud before drawing back together. I ran, only for maybe 50 yards. Then shame caught up to me and I slowed, heart thudding, telling myself I'd panicked over a sick animal. I even turned around to prove to myself I was being ridiculous. The trail behind me was empty. The shelter stood there quiet as a bus stop. I almost laughed from relief. Then I noticed the sounds were gone. No birds, no distant road noise, nothing but my own breath. From the shelter, in a voice that sounded exactly like Amos from next door, came, "You forgot your keys, Delaney." He says my name flat, almost annoyed. Every time he brings over mail, the wind blows into his yard. Same exact tone. My keys were zipped in my running belt. I didn't answer. I started moving again, fast but controlled, eyes on the trail. Up ahead, the ravine section narrowed between limestone shoulders. Mud there held tracks well. I hit that stretch and stopped dead. 2 sets of prints crossed the trail. One set was deer tracks. The other looked like bare human feet, narrow and deep at the heel, with long toe marks dragging slightly, as if whatever made them was still learning how people planted their steps. They overlapped each other in places, deer over human, human over deer, as if both paths belonged to the same body at different moments. That was enough for me. I cut off the loop and headed straight for the service road, which meant bushwhacking through scrub and thorns. Branches snagged my sleeves. Something brushed the back of my calf once, and I made a sound I didn't know I was capable of making. I reached the road and could see the parking area through the trees when I heard hooves behind me on gravel. Not many, too, deliberate. I looked back. It was standing in the road now, but it had changed again. The back half still moved like a deer's, tense and narrow, but the front had risen too high, shoulders shifting under the hide in a way that suggested arms trying to remember themselves. The face hung between shapes, snout collapsing inward, teeth showing. And one of the eyes, God, I hate this part, one of the eyes was looking straight at me while the other drifted toward the tree line like it was listening to something else. Then it smiled with gums that were much too human. I bolted for my car, fumbling so badly with the fob I dropped it twice. When the locks finally popped, I threw myself inside and hit the lock button over and over while the thing stepped to the edge of the lot. It did not come onto the asphalt. It just stood there, thin morning light behind it, and lifted one front leg. The hoof opened. 5 pale finger bones spread and flexed once before folding shut again. I drove home shaking so hard I missed my own driveway the first time. Later that afternoon, I went out to grab groceries from the back seat and found mud on the driver's side door. Not splashed, placed. 4 narrow streaks about the length of fingers and 1 half-moon impression above them. Like a thumb pressed hard enough to leave the grain of skin in the dirt. I quit running those trails after that. Amos still brings over mail sometimes. Every now and then he says my name from the porch, and for half a second I'm back on that road hearing hooves behind me. Story 5. There's a hollow in Jackson County my family stopped talking about after my great aunt died, which of course made me want to see it more. Not because I'm brave, more because silence in a family is like a loose tooth. You keep worrying it with your tongue. The place sat at the end of an overgrown path behind what used to be our people's land, just a dip between ridges with a collapsed smokehouse, a hand pump, and a little cemetery fenced in by rusted wire. Off one side of the hollow was a shallow cave or rock house, depending on how fancy you want to sound. My brother Keaton agreed to go because he'd never once had an instinct that said don't. I brought a cheap bouquet from a gas station because I felt bad showing up empty-handed. He brought a red lighter, a folding knife, and 2 bottles of orange soda that rolled around on the floorboard the whole drive. On the way there, we passed a man selling ramps under a pop-up tent and a dog asleep in the middle of a church parking lot. The dog never lifted its head when we slowed down. That bothered me for no reason I could explain. The hollow looked smaller than I'd imagined. Family places often do. The pump handle was tied upright with baling wire. There was a child's metal spoon at the base of it, black with age. Keaton spent 10 minutes trying to get the old hand pump working while I pulled weeds from my gray dance stone and arranged those sad grocery store flowers in a mason jar I found nearby. The first uneasy thing was the smell from the rock house. Not rot, not exactly. It smelled like wet pennies and wild onions, sharp enough to notice from 30 feet away. Keaton went to investigate while I stayed by the cemetery fence, reading names I already knew. A minute later, he called for me, not scared, just puzzled. Inside the rock house, someone had stacked flat stones into 7 little towers against the back wall, each one about knee-high, balanced too neatly to be accidental. On top of the tallest sat a bird's nest lined not with grass but strips of cloth, blue gingham, white lace, old floral print. Probably kids, Keaton said. I nodded because that was better than admitting it looked like offerings. When we turned to leave, one of the stone stacks fell over behind us. No wind, no animal darting through. It just collapsed with a dry clatter. Keaton swore and laughed after, but the laugh was thin. I told myself the stones had shifted when we walked in. Vibrations. The ground in there was uneven. Then a voice from outside the rock house said, very calmly, "Leave the flowers." It was my gray dance voice. Not how she sounded sick at the end, either. Her regular voice, firm and nasal and a little tired. The voice she used when she caught us kids tracking mud into her kitchen. Keaton's face changed when he heard it. He'd heard it too. We came out slow. The hollow looked the same, except the mason jar was no longer on the grave. It sat on top of the cemetery gatepost instead, perfectly centered, flowers trembling in the breeze. Neither of us had moved it. Keaton muttered that maybe he hadn't forgot, but he hadn't been near the gate. I hadn't either. We both knew it. That should have sent us back to the truck. Instead, Keaton, stubborn as rust, climbed the fence to put the jar back. He had one leg over the wire when something tapped his boot from below. He jerked and almost fell. I thought at first he'd snagged on metal. Then I saw a hand slide back beneath the grass on the other side of the fence. Not a whole arm, just a hand and wrist, pale gray with dirt ground into the creases, moving through the weeds too smoothly, as if the earth had softened to let it pass. We froze. A second hand rose inside the cemetery, fingers spread. Then a face came up between 2 grave markers, only halfway, just enough to show the forehead, eyes, and bridge of the nose. The skin looked waterlogged, stretched slick over the bone, and the eyes were open too wide, not blinking, with clumps of grave dirt stuck in the lashes. It wasn't climbing out. It was watching us from level with the ground, as if the rest of it remained buried and comfortable there. That image is the one I can't shake, not the dead-looking face. The patience of it. Keaton dropped backward off the fence and hit the ground hard. I grabbed his jacket and pulled. We ran the path out of that hollow so fast briars tore my jeans to threads. Behind us, I could hear the hand pump squealing up and down on its own, metal shrieking in quick little bursts. Once, over that sound, my gray dance voice called, "You forgot the flowers." We reached the truck and found both rear tires soft as if they'd been let out, though not cut. Keaton wanted to change them. I wanted to drive on the rims if I had to. We compromised by crawling to the main road and flagging down a farm truck. That night, when I emptied my pockets, I found the cemetery spoon in my coat. Same blackened little spoon from beside the pump. I know I never picked it up. On the bowl of it were 3 wet grains of dirt and 1 tiny blue thread that matched the flower's ribbon. I still talk about family history now and then, but not that hollow. Some silences earn their place. Story 6. A few years back, a friend of mine named Priya got obsessed with paddle camping and convinced the rest of us it would be relaxing to spend a night near one of the cave-riddled river bends south of McCreary County. She was the kind of person who made spreadsheets for fun and packed her gear in color-coded dry bags. Our other friend, Mateo, came because he had a canoe and no sense of foreboding. I came because I said yes too quickly and then didn't want to be the one who backed out. It was late summer, hot enough in the parking area to make the air shimmer above the gravel, but cooler down near the water where the bluffs cut the light. We had tortillas, summer sausage, a dented camp stove, bug spray, and a grocery bag full of peaches that bruised before we even launched. Mateo wore an ugly orange fishing hat with one side pinned up. Priya had a notebook where she wrote down mileage and campsite coordinates like we were preparing testimony. By dusk, we'd found a flat little shelf above the river under a limestone overhang. Not a full cave, more a deep recess with a soot-black ceiling from who knows how many old fires. The water moved slow there. You could hear frogs and the soft slap of current against the bank. For a while, it really was peaceful. We cooked noodles, argued over whether fireflies are romantic or just bugs with better marketing, and watched bats flick in and out at the mouth of the overhang. The first odd thing was small. Our paddles kept changing places, not while we were looking, of course. But we'd set all 3 by the right-hand boulder, then find one propped against the left wall. Priya blamed Mateo. Mateo blamed slope and gravity, which made no sense because paddles don't climb. Later, while I was peeling a peach with my thumbnail, I noticed little wet prints in the sand at the edge of camp. Child-sized feet maybe, except there were too many toes. I squinted at them until the fire popped and made me jump, and by the time I looked again, the prints were half smudged by trickling water. Raccoon, Mateo said. Sure, fine, raccoon. Night deepened. The river got black and flat. Across from us, the trees turned into one shape. At some point, I think around 10, maybe later, someone whispered my name from outside the overhang, not loud, right at the edge of hearing. Oma. No one calls me that except family. I looked at Priya expecting a joke, but she was staring toward the water with her mouth slightly open. Mateo had gone still too. Then from farther upstream came another voice using Mateo's name in a different tone. Then Priya's, one after another, not a chorus, more like several separate people spread out along the bank, testing which name belonged to which face. I told myself other campers, drunk kids, sound carrying strangely over water. But there were no lanterns, no laughter, no boat lights. Just those voices, low and careful. Priya whispered, "Get in the boats." That was the smartest thing anybody said all night. We started shoving gear into dry bags. The voices stopped immediately, which was worse. I grabbed my life vest and turned toward the river just as something pale and wet rose from the dark water beside Mateo's canoe. At first, I thought it was driftwood standing upright. Then it lifted a hand onto the gunwale. The fingers were thin and jointed wrong, bending in 2 extra places, and strung between them were ribbons of river weed like skin not fully decided. A second shape came up behind it, then a third farther out, all human-sized, all white as cave clay under the starlight, and all of them smiling with mouths too small for the number of teeth inside. The one nearest us tilted its head and in Priya's exact voice said, "You forgot the map." That's the image people ask about when I've told this carefully to a few close friends. The hand on the canoe, the weed hanging off it like wet hair. Mateo did not freeze. He shoved the canoe so hard it nearly flipped, then smacked one of the reaching hands with his paddle. It made a sound I never want to hear again. Not a cry. more like air forced through reeds. We launched ugly and fast, gear half secured, camp stove abandoned. Priya took the bow of her kayak and started paddling downstream without waiting for us. I jumped into Mateo's canoe and nearly sent us both over. Behind us, the pale things came fully out of the water, too many now to count clearly, wading after us in the shallows with those jerky, careful steps. They didn't pursue into deeper water. They lined the bank instead, shoulder to shoulder, and kept calling after us in our own voices. Not begging, not threatening, just repeating practical little things we'd left behind. You forgot the peaches, forgot the stove, forgot your hat. By the time we reached the launch, I was shaking so hard Priya had to tie my boat for me. We drove to a gas station and sat under fluorescent lights until dawn, drinking terrible coffee and not looking at each other much. A week later, Priya cleaned river mud from one of the dry bags and found a smooth white pebble in the bottom. She almost threw it out, then noticed grooves on one side. Tiny, even grooves like teeth marks, human-looking teeth marks, only much narrower. I still won't camp by water under a bluff. Too much of Kentucky has mouths in it already. Story 7. I got stranded near Livingston after taking a wrong turn on a county road that narrowed into gravel, then mud, then what felt more like somebody's private grudge than a road. My phone battery was dying because I'd spent the first half of the drive using maps and the second half pretending I didn't need them. It had rained earlier, one of those cold spring rains that leaves everything smelling clean except your nerves. By the time I realized I'd blown a tire, dusk was leaning in. I had a donut spare, but the shoulder was so soft I couldn't get the jack stable. A trail sign stood maybe 50 yards ahead, one of those weathered brown boards with half the lettering faded off. Beyond it, a footpath led toward a sandstone rock house I could see through the trees. My thought process was embarrassingly simple. Get out of the rain. Charge phone from power bank. Wait. The rock house was bigger up close, deep enough to stay mostly dry, with old fire rings and a wall blackened by smoke. Someone had left an empty Vienna sausage can, a broken trekking pole, and a child's puzzle piece shaped like a fish. I set my backpack against the wall, peeled off my wet overshirt, and ate stale pretzels from the glove compartment. I remember being annoyed that one of my socks had a hole at the big toe. It's strange what your mind clings to before it understands anything. The shelter had a shallow back wall, but parts of it were slick with rain seepage, enough to reflect shapes if you aimed your flashlight wrong. At first I thought the movement in those reflections was just my own light shaking. Then I noticed a problem. I would move, and one of the reflected shapes would move a fraction of a second late. I tested it 3 times. Lift hand, lower hand, step sideways. Most of the wet wall mirrored me normally, warped a little by stone. But one narrow strip about shoulder width deep in the back returned a figure that lagged. Not by much, just enough to make my scalp tight. I laughed once under my breath because I still wanted this to be physics. Water tension, uneven surface, something explainable. Outside, rain ticked through leaves. A truck passed somewhere far off. Normal sounds. Then from that wet strip on the wall, I heard a soft tapping from inside the stone, not on the surface. Inside, tap, 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 tap. I moved the flashlight beam away. The tapping stopped. I put it back. There it was again. I should have gone back to the car, flat tire or not. Instead, I sat with my knees up, watching that strip of reflected darkness while the last of the daylight thinned away. At some point, I must have drifted, not fully asleep but close, because the next thing I remember is hearing my own voice say, very near, "Don't shine it in my face." I snapped upright. The flashlight had rolled from my lap and was pointing straight at the wet wall. My reflection sat there. That's how it looked for one awful second. Me, same shape, same bent knees, same jacket draped beside me, except it was not copying me anymore. It was still. Then it slowly raised one hand and pressed it from the other side of the reflection, as if the stone had become a pane of wet glass. The palm was too long. The fingers had one extra joint each. Water streamed around them without breaking. I stumbled backward so hard I hit my head on the rock lip behind me. The figure in the wall leaned closer, and the face sharpened just enough for me to see there was no depth where the eyes should have been. Not holes, not skin, just a smooth blur, as though the stone refused that part of it. I ran out into the rain and nearly ate dirt on the trail. Behind me I could hear tapping moving along the inside of the rock house wall, keeping pace, fast now, excited. My car looked like salvation until I remembered the tire. Didn't matter. I threw myself inside anyway, locked the doors, and crouched there with the dead phone in one hand. Rain hammered the roof. Mud sucked at the rims when I tried to move the car, but after rocking it twice I managed to lurch forward enough to get onto firmer ground. In the rearview mirror, the rock house sat dark except for one bright rectangle of reflected sky on the wet back wall. There was someone standing in that reflection, not in the shelter. In the reflection only. It watched my car lights pull away without moving. A tow driver found me at a wider patch of road maybe 20 minutes later. He kept asking why I was bleeding from the scalp. I told him I slipped changing the tire. Easier. The next day in daylight, I went to grab my overshirt from the passenger seat and found it damp, though the rest of the car was dry. On the chest, where rain should never have reached, was a handprint outlined in fine gray grit. The print had 6 fingers. I sold that car by the end of the summer. Felt dishonest, honestly, but I couldn't keep driving something that still smelled faintly of wet stone every time it rained. Story 8. I volunteered one October with a conservation group mapping sinkholes and informal trail damage near a remote section of Daniel Boone National Forest. That sounds more official than it was. We had clipboards, flagging tape, bug spray, and a bunch of people trying to act competent in hiking boots bought on sale. My partner for the day was a guy named Hollies who talked like every sentence was the start of a funny story but never quite got to the punchline. The section we were assigned had a narrow footpath curling around a sinkhole field and ending near a cave entrance fenced decades ago, though the fence had long since sagged down into the weeds. The weather couldn't decide between sun and cloud. 1 minute bright enough to sweat, the next minute cold in the shadows. I'd packed a turkey sandwich, 2 clementines, and a tiny bottle of ibuprofen because my shoulder had been aching for a week from sleeping wrong. We found the usual stuff first: candy wrappers, broken beer bottle, spray paint on a boulder. At one point, Hollies bent to tie his boot, and I noticed a line scratched into the dirt crossing the trail in front of us. Then another farther up. Then more. Parallel lines, each one about an inch apart, running from one side of the path to the other as if someone had dragged a 5-pronged rake across the trail over and over. "Turkey sign," Hollies joked. I said maybe somebody hauled brush through. Even while saying it, I knew it wasn't right. The scratches were too even and too deep. In places, the leaves beside them had been sliced clean through. The cave entrance sat in a little bowl of cold air. That's the only way to describe it. You stepped down 3 feet and everything changed: smell, sound, temperature. Hollies lifted the fallen fence wire with a stick and peered into the dark. We weren't going inside. That wasn't even slightly the assignment. From somewhere below came a rasping sound like claws or nails moving over limestone in short, careful strokes. We both went still. "Porcupine," Hollies said, and I actually loved him for trying. Then something answered from inside with his voice. Probably. Just that one word. His exact voice, except flatter, emptied out. Hollies dropped the stick. We backed away together, not fast yet, just enough to rejoin the trail. Then we noticed all the flagging tape we'd tied on branches during the morning had been moved lower. Every strip now hung around knee-height, fluttering from saplings and roots as if the trail had been marked for something much shorter than a person. I remember my heart doing this strange skipping thing. Not pounding, skipping. We started walking fast toward the trailhead. No discussion. The woods felt crowded, though I couldn't point to anything moving. Once I heard leaves stirring beside us and thought squirrel, but the sound kept pace too exactly. Holly said, "Don't run." I agreed. Then we both ran anyway when the scratching started behind us on the trail. It was rapid and dry and close. I looked back once. Something long and low was crossing from tree to tree without really touching the open ground for more than a blink. Limbs, if that's what they were, reached too far ahead of the body, hooking into trunks and hauling it forward sideways. The skin was the color of raw mushrooms, almost translucent where the shoulders flexed. I only saw the head clearly when it lifted over a log. Its jaw split vertically, top half peeling away from the bottom like wet bark opening, and inside there was another smaller mouth working frantically as if the outer one was just a door. That image sits in me like a piece of glass. We couldn't outrun it on the trail, so Holly's did the smartest dumb thing I've ever seen. He jumped the path and slid down into a blowdown pile where storm-fallen trees had tangled into a wall of roots and branches. I followed, crawling under splintered trunks and through red clay, shoulder screaming, while the scratching thing skimmed past above us. It stopped. For a long moment, all I heard was my own breath and Holly's trying not to cough. Then, right above my head, in my mother's voice this time, gentle and confused, something said, "Yvonne, are you under there?" I bit the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted blood rather than answer. Eventually, minutes, maybe an hour, I don't know, the woods resumed ordinary sounds. We stayed hidden until the light shifted amber and then crawled out and bushwhacked straight downslope to a fire road. At the parking lot, Holly's leaned over with hands on his knees and laughed once, a broken little sound. I thought we were both in shock, and maybe we were. When I got home, I found one of our orange flagging ribbons looped through the laces of my right boot, tied there neatly. In the middle of it were 5 parallel cuts, sliced almost all the way through, but not enough to break it apart. I never volunteered for trail mapping again. I donate online now like a coward, which suits me fine. Story 9. The last one happened on land my uncle was trying to sell near Pine Mountain, a steep piece of Kentucky property with a collapsed barn, a spring house, and a narrow old path that led up behind the ridge to a cave used for storage generations ago. I didn't want to help him clear it out. I'd been sleeping badly for months. My marriage was in that thin ice stage where every conversation sounded normal and felt dangerous, and the idea of spending a weekend in cold mountain air seemed healthier than sitting in my apartment pretending not to check my phone. My uncle Ephraim met me there with a toolbox, 2 sausage biscuits wrapped in napkins, and an old revolver he kept in the truck but swore he'd never need. He talked too much when he was nervous. Told me about property taxes, a neighbor's bull getting loose, the best place in Harlan for fried catfish. I nodded and hauled junk from the spring house while he pried warped boards off the barn door. The land had that late November look that strips everything to bone. Gray grass, bare branches, sky like old dishwater. Behind the barn, the trail to the cave ran between rhododendron tunnels and patches of exposed limestone. At one point, we passed a rusted sled frame half swallowed by vines and a stack of feed sacks hard as boards from age. Uncle Ephraim didn't want to go up to the cave after noon. Said the light disappeared early on that side of the ridge. Practical enough. Still, I noticed he checked his watch 3 times while saying it. We found the cave entrance by following the spring line. It wasn't big, more a widened crack with a dry chamber just inside where shelves had once been built into the wall. Broken jars lay everywhere, glittering in the dust. A mason jar ring crunched under my boot. On the left wall, someone had scratched a row of tally marks into the stone, then stopped mid-group. The chamber felt wrong immediately. Not haunted, not dramatic, just occupied in some way the eye couldn't settle on. I kept thinking there was a person standing in the back corner until I looked directly and saw only shadow. We worked quickly, stacking salvageable jars and pulling out old scrap. Ephraim found a tobacco tin with marbles in it and smiled for the first time all day. Then he frowned and asked if I'd brought a coat hanger up here. I said no. At the cave mouth, hanging from a low branch that hadn't been there when we entered, was a loop made from green switchvine, twisted into a crude circle, suspended at eye level. In the center of the loop, someone had fastened a little shape made of peeled bark strips. It was a person, or supposed to be. No arms, long legs, oval head. I wish I could say that was the worst image of the day, but it was. Ephraim cut the vine down with his pocket knife and told me we were done. I started to agree when we heard someone walking up the trail toward us. Heavy steps, slow, deliberate. We both relaxed for half a second, thinking neighbor, hunter, anyone normal. Ephraim even called out hello. The steps kept coming, but no one appeared. Then from just outside the cave, in my own voice came, "Don't go yet." I don't know if you've ever heard your own voice used by something that doesn't know how to be you. The rhythm is what goes first, the tiny little human hesitations. This had my tone, but none of my timing. Ephraim went white around the mouth. The shadow in the back corner moved, not stepping out, unfolding. That's the closest word I have. It rose from itself, all angles at first, then length, then a head brushing the cave ceiling without seeming to straighten. The skin looked loose, almost draped, with dark, wet patches where it clung to the ribs. Its arms hung too long and ended in hands that opened and closed without hurry, like it was testing the air. I saw the face only when it leaned into the light. No eyes, just smooth, pale flesh where they should have been, and below that a narrow vertical seam that trembled as if something beneath it wanted out. Ephraim fired the revolver once. The blast in that cave was enormous. My ears rang. Dust came down from the ceiling. The thing jerked, not like it had been hit, but like the sound annoyed it. Then the seam in its face split open. Inside was not blood or teeth. Inside was another darkness moving. A depth that seemed farther back than the skull had any right to hold. That was enough. We ran. The trail down the ridge turned slick with leaves and loose stone. Ephraim lost one boot in the mud and kept going in a sock. I grabbed his elbow twice when he stumbled. Behind us came those same slow steps, never hurrying, always the same distance no matter how fast we went. Once I risked a glance back and saw it between the rhododendron trunks, ducking under branches it did not need to duck under, almost politely. We didn't head for the truck. That path was too exposed. Instead, Ephraim veered toward the spring house and kicked in the rotted side door. We got inside and shoved a shelving unit against it while water from the spring dripped steadily through the stone trough like a clock. Outside, the steps stopped. A long minute passed. Then there was a single knock on the spring house wall, gentle as someone asking to be let in. After that, nothing until dawn. We stayed there all night with one flashlight and two dead phones, listening to water drip and mice in the insulation. When the sky finally turned the little window from black to gray, we pushed the shelf aside and went out. The truck was untouched. The yard looked ordinary. Even the vine loop was gone from where Ephraim had dropped it. For a while I almost convinced myself the whole thing had been stress and echo and fear making patterns out of dark. Then I saw the spring house door in morning light. On the outside wood at eye level, someone had pressed a rectangle of pale bark flat against the boards. Carved into it was that same little figure from the vine loop, long legs, oval head, no arms, only this time there were two of them, one large, one small. Uncle Ephraim sold the property cheap and never told the buyers why. I didn't ask where he put the bark carving. I didn't want him to say he'd burned it, because if he had, I think I'd sometimes expect to smell that smoke. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed these stories, hit that like button and subscribe for more. Let me know in the comments which story unsettled you most, and share this with your friends who love a good scare. Until next time, stay safe out there.